I can fix the NBA today, and it's really not that difficult. I'm going to propose the biggest single change to the game of basketball in probably 40 years. Hold on to your butts, it's about to get nuts. Hoopers and Hoopettes, welcome back to the film studio. I am your host, Tommy Dubs, and today we're going to be talking about the biggest issue going on with the NBA right now, and that is what's wrong with it. It feels like you can't read any tweet about the NBA without seeing something like this, and you certainly can't turn on any sports news without hearing something like this.
They got some really great players today, but it's really just become a three-point shooting contest.
Steph is so good that everybody wants to be Steph, but nobody can be Steph. And the basketball is not good right now.
The game is repetitive and boring. Adam Silver needs to change the game.
Now, I've heard every possible reason why this could be happening, from blaming the players to blaming the media to blaming the game itself, and pretty soon, knowing our world, they're going to blame it on the Jews or the Arabs. We live in a really toxic time. But based on my own research and observations, I think I've narrowed down the 4 biggest problems that the NBA is facing. Now, I'm not going to sit here and postulate, because I know big words, obviously, that these are the only things that the NBA has wrong with them. But if you had a pie chart, in my mind, these make up 70 to 80% of the biggest issues. And as any good analyst does, I'm going to be bringing some solutions today, not just complaining about the game. I believe that after reflecting, doing some research, and yes, much to the chagrin of my younger self, even doing math, just don't tell my high school math teachers I don't want to prove them right. I do have a calculator in my pocket though, so they weren't 100% right. Liar! I believe that I've come up with some really common sense solutions, and even some weird ones, that are going to make the game a lot better. So without further ado, let's start with number 1, and that is politics. Let's just get this one out of the way quick because it's weird and controversial, and I don't want to dwell on it too long because I think the solution's easy. I know that you don't really know who I am, but I'm heavily involved in politics. I have a degree in it, and I worked in the field for 6 years prior to my current job, so I'm definitely somebody who can recognize the signs of politics and the influence they have over certain aspects of our culture. Now, that being said, I don't see a ton of it in basketball, but it's there. And I get it. At the end of the day, people want to come home from work or after a long day, and they want to sit down and watch their favorite team play without being inundated by what in their mind is the toxicity of politics. And this goes both ways. This isn't a Republican or a Democratic argument. I personally don't want to see Colin Kaepernick kneeling on the field, and I also didn't like seeing Nick Bosa wear a Make America Great Again hat in a post-game interview. In my mind, this solution's easy. Let's just make it like the military. On your own time, you can do whatever you want. You can vote for, support, donate to any organization, any individual that you want. But when you're wearing a uniform, you're representing something bigger than yourself, and therefore can't be seen having a political stance. I'm not a shut up and dribble guy. Some of these guys absolutely should be able to go do what they want on their own. But understand that when you're wearing a uniform, you're doing something bigger than yourself. And therefore, there should be no influence of politics in our sports. Now, if you want to follow these guys because you agree with their political views, you can do that on their Instagram, social media pages, etc., etc. But for everybody that just wants to watch a basketball game, let's just let them be able to watch a basketball game. Fair enough? All right, everybody good? Sweet. Let's move on to point number 2, which I think is where things start to get really interesting and probably the biggest problem that we see today, and that is quality versus quantity. This is one of the longest running and, in my opinion, most valid complaints about the NBA is that the game is watered down. We've sacrificed quality of games versus quantity. We've watered down the NBA by having an 82-game season that makes each individual game not matter that much. And the reason why I think this is such a rich target is because it allows us to attack the owners and the league itself by using the big buzzword that everybody likes to, and that is money. Yes, money, greed, capitalism, buzzword, buzzword, buzzword. And I get it. And I think that there is some truth to that statement. The NBA has absolutely sacrificed quality for quantity in the aim to make more money. According to a quick ChatGPT calculation, because AI is our overlord and I am its eager servant waiting to serve it.
Congratulations. You are being rescued.
The average NBA franchise makes between $2.5 to $3.2 million per game. We can just extrapolate that out, and obviously what that means is more games, means more home games, means more money coming in. And I get where owners are coming from. Less games means less revenue, right? Well, not necessarily, and one great example of that is the NFL. For those of you that live under a rock, the NFL plays only 17 games a season, not counting the playoffs, opposed to the NBA's whopping 82 games. But would it surprise you to know that the NFL makes more money every year than the NBA does? Yeah, that's right. Over the past 5 years, the NFL has consistently earned more revenue per season, and it's not really close. As you can see on this chart that I'm putting up, the NFL dominates the NBA when it comes to this. Now, I'm not going to say that this is all because of quality over quantity. There are a huge number of factors that go into this, including stadium size and broadcast deals and revenue sharing, etc., etc., etc. But the point still remains, you can have a very profitable league and only have 17 games in a season. And it's hard to not say that there might be some aspect of quality over quantity. Let's just take this guy, for example. Jokic is a good basketball player, like a really, really good basketball player. And I'm not saying that he does this, but if he looked at his team statistics and when he plays, his team wins 70% of their games, and when he sits, they win 30% of their games, just doing some simple math, he can figure out that I can sit out 20 games this season and my team can still go 49 and 33. I'll put the math up here so you can see that I'm not just making these numbers up. And although these numbers are just hypothetical, I think it proves a point that not only are individual games not very important in the regular season, but 20 regular season games aren't that important in the regular season. I think that's why we see a huge amount of load management, because each individual game just doesn't matter. Now take the NFL. You never hear of a player sitting out for load management, save the end of the season when they're either tanking for a draft pick or they are already in the playoffs and are trying to save their players. And herein lies the main problem with the NBA. Too many games devalues individual games and allows incentives for players to not play or not play as hard, and overall lowers the quality of the games that we see. As for the revenue aspect, I get it. The NBA wants to make as much money as possible, but I don't think that they would lose as much as they think they would if they reduced the number of games. And that's because of basic economics.
They will be able to teach economists to economizing the economy to help the economy.
Now, stick with me, jocks. I'll get through this quickly, okay? But this is important. If you take something that's abundant, like the number of NBA games, and you reduce it and make it scarce, that thing inherently goes up in value as long as there's a demand for it. Think of it simply. If you're on a desert island with 5 people and 1 apple, as opposed to a desert island with 5 people and 100 apples, the island that has 1 apple, that apple is going to inherently be worth a lot more than the island that has 100 apples. People are going to do anything for that apple. Keep your minds out of the gutter. And I think that this applies to the NBA as well. Just because you reduce the number of games doesn't mean you're going to lose revenue, because you inherently make those games more scarce and therefore more valuable. And honestly, I think that if you are producing a product that's higher quality as opposed to higher quantity, not only are you going to have more players play in those games because they mean more, but you're going to also have more people that want to watch those games and participate in those games because they mean more. So my proposal and my ultimate solution to this, let's make the NBA a 55-game season. This cuts a third of the games out, which is still enough time for the cream to rise to the top. It also de-incentivizes players from sitting out because each game means more. I mean, honestly, 2 or 3 games here or there could be the difference between making the playoffs or not. And it also is going to create a product that more people are going to want to watch and participate in because it's more scarce. At the end of the day, even if you lose some revenue in the short term, if you create a better product in the long term, you're going to generate more interest and more fans that will pay itself off in the long run. Now, there's some nuance to this and the possibility of moving to a 9-month season if we only play 55 games, but I won't go into that. The point is, let's take a serious look at reducing the number of games to create a better product. Now, this point is also going to tie into point number 3 and the biggest problem that I see with the NBA today, and that is the playoffs. This is a multifaceted thing, so let's start with the direct tie into point number 2, quality over quantity. There are too many playoff games. I'm sorry, and I'm going to break it to you nicely because I feel like I'm a decent person. We don't need 7-game first-round series. That's just ridiculous in my opinion. With all due respect to the 4 and 5 seeds or, teams that limp their way in, we don't need to see them play 7 games against a 1 seed or a 2 seed. Very rarely do we see that upset happen, and when we do, it's awesome, but it can be done in a much more interesting way. One thing that the NBA has done recently is implemented the play-in game, which I think both is awesome and has some problems. You see, with the play-in game being introduced, you capture some of that magic of the NFL playoffs or March Madness, where it's one game, take all, and anything can happen. Now, where you lose me a little bit is that you play games between teams that nobody really cares about. No disrespect to the Bulls and Hawks, but in 2023-2024, they played a play-in game. Do you know who won that game? Yeah, I didn't think so. So how do we capture that sense of excitement, but make it mean more and have higher stakes? My proposal, first round, best of 3. I think this captures some of that one game takes all and at least makes the games much more important than they were before, and also creates a lot of interest around a big upset happening. You win 2, you're moving on to the next round. Now this protects some of the higher seeds, and we'll get into that when I show you my full proposed playoff structure, but just know that it's not a full protection for these guys, because in round 2, it's best of 5. That's right, so you win 3 out of 2 and you move on to the semifinals or the conference finals, which actually aren't conference finals anymore, but we'll go into that in a second. And it's not until you get to the conference finals that you start playing 7-game series. So the last 3 series, the 2 conference final games and the finals games, are the only one that are actually 7-game series. One of the problems with the NBA is that most of the time going into the playoffs, you kind of know who's going to be there in the end. Just look at the Cavs and Warriors in the mid-2000s, or 2010s rather, and look at the Celtics last year. Any good analyst worth their salt would have told you that those were the teams that were going to make it to the finals. But if you reduce the number of games and allow for more upsets, you will, in the words of the Joker,
Introduce a little anarchy. Upset the established order.
Now, part 2 of fixing the NBA is the structure. And I'm just going to be honest with the NBA here. Having conferences is dumb. I get why having conferences was important when the NBA was founded and you didn't want to have to travel across the country to play different games. But with air travel improving and private planes, that doesn't really matter anymore. Now, I'm totally fine with an NBA regular season having conferences. You don't want to make the Lakers go to Boston, fly home for a game, go to Miami. It's much easier on the schedule if things are kind of condensed and close together. So what I propose is that we keep conferences for the regular season, but only allow the top 12 overall teams to make it into the playoffs. Right now it's the top 20 in both conferences, and that's way too many. I think it waters down the product and makes it way less interesting. The playoffs would work like this. The 1 through 4 seeds get a first round bye, and the 5 through 12 seeds play it out to move on. Basically, whoever wins out of the 5 through 12 seeds, the highest seed would play the lowest seed of the bye games, and the lowest seed would play the highest seed. Make sense? So if the 12 seed won, they would play the 1 seed, and if the 5 seed won, they would play the 4 seed. You with me so far? Furthermore, getting rid of conferences, I think that you get some really interesting matchups. As of me filming this on January 22nd, the top 4 teams are the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Boston Celtics, and the New York Knicks. These teams would all get first round byes. In the first round, best of 3, so first to win 2 games, we get the Rockets versus the Pistons, the Grizzlies versus the Hawks, the Nuggets versus the Clippers, and the Bucks versus the Pacers. You have some really interesting matchups there, and then that doesn't even extrapolate what happens down the road, where you could see some really interesting matchups like Celtics Nuggets. I think this creates a new dynamic and also takes away some of the fluff that we have from the playoffs right now. It also creates more incentive for players to play more games because now only the top 12 teams make it and not the top 20. Bottom line is we've got to restructure the playoffs. I just think that it's ridiculous at this point that we have structured it this way. Let's change things around. Let's make it more interesting and make it more competitive in the long run. Okay, you're stuck with me this long. Now let's get really, really crazy. I'm going to propose the biggest single change to the game of basketball in probably 40 years. Hold on to your butts. It's about to get nuts.
Hold on to your butts.
Point number 4, reduce the value of a 3-pointer to 2.5 points.
What?
You serious?
All right, don't click off yet. Don't click off yet. Stick with me. Stick with me. I will get you there, I promise. But to get you there, I have to make you understand why this needs to happen. First of all, the single greatest complaint right now that I think we're hearing is that the NBA shoots too many threes, and they're not wrong. Do you want to hear an insane statistic? Larry Bird, who was arguably one of the greatest shooters of all time, in his season where he made the most threes of his career in a single season, he made 98 three-pointers. In 2023-2024, there were 128 players that made at least 98 three-pointers. These include Bobby Portis, Al Horford, and Miles Turner, all who made more threes than that. That's not a disrespect to those guys, but they are not in the same stratosphere as shooters as Larry Bird is, let's just be honest. Furthermore, on March 18th, 1986, Larry Bird became the all-time leader in three-pointers made with 247. Last season, Steph made 357, and altogether there were 4 players that made more than 247 threes in a regular season. That just shows you how much the game has changed and how prevalent the three has become. And there's a really, really big reason for this, and I need to explain to you why. We're going to get into some mathematics here, but this is really important to understand why the game is being played this way right now, so stick with me. I'll make it as quick as I possibly can. Basically, this all started with Danny Ainge in the 80s, where he realized that the three was an extremely undervalued shot, but it wasn't really utilized or exploited until the 2010s with Mike D'Antoni and Steve Kerr. These two coaches really began to realize how undervalued the three was, and if you shoot more of them, it's much better for your team than shooting twos. To look at it simply, let's take a look at the statistics. Last year, two-pointers were made at approximately a 48% rate. To make things simple, let's just round that up to 50%. So if you came down the court and you shot a two, you had a 50-50 chance of making that shot. Extrapolate that out, that means that the value of that shot every time is 1 point. Do you understand why? To make this make more sense, if you had 100 possessions and you shot a two-pointer every time you came down the court, you would end the game with 100 points based on perfect statistics. You come down, you shoot 100 twos, you make half, which is 50, you end up with 100 points. So using the statistic-based approach, you can actually start to calculate what the most valuable shots on the basketball court are. Obviously, one of the best shots is going to be a wide open layup, which is made at about a 95% clip, which means that the value of that shot is 1.9. Free throws are shot on average at about 77%, so if you get fouled and you shoot 2 free throws, the value of that is about 1.54, obviously very high as well. Even contested layups were shot at about a 59% percentage rate last year, making the value of that shot 1.18 points per possession. And finally, where things start to get weird is with the three-pointer. See, even though the league average for three-pointers is 37% as of last year, the value of that shot is inherently worth more because it's worth 3 points. So 37% at 3 points, the value comes out to 1.11. The point is the three-pointer shot at a lower percentage than a two-pointer is still worth more points. Let's just run a hypothetical game. If we have a team that comes down and shoots two-pointers every time at league average, 50%, actually 48% if we're being honest, because I rounded up, that team would end up scoring 96 points in a game. If an NBA team came down and shot threes every time and shot 100 possessions, had 100 possessions, that team would end up with 111 points. The final score would be 111 to 96, which is kind of a blowout. Now, why has this affected the big man so much? Well, turns out statistics for a post-up are even worse than just a two-pointer. The average percentage of a post-up play in 2023 or 2024 was 44.5%. Let's make those two teams play again, and the three-point shooting team would win 111 to 89. That is for sure a blowout. Okay, that's kind of what you need to know. We're done with that. We can move away from statistics. But you see what I'm talking about, right? The three is inherently a more valuable shot because players have improved their shooting over the years, make that shot at a higher clip, and therefore that shot is just worth more points. So how do we solve this problem and stop players from trying to exploit this three? Well, there's a couple solutions that I've heard, but I think that mine makes the most sense. Solution one that I've heard is get rid of the three. I don't like this. I do think that shooting should be valued somehow, and if we get rid of the three, I think we're going to see a cluttered mess of a game like we did in the 70s or 80s, where everybody's going to be into the line. It's not going to be very aesthetic. I'm a basketball purist. I want to see basketball play at the highest level. I want to see a balancing of the scales, not a reversal of the scales. Point two is make dunks worth three-pointers. I've always loved this one, but I think that if we actually take this as a serious point, this is just going to exacerbate the problem. Right now, most shots are threes, layups and dunks, or free throws. If you make a dunk worth 3 points, you're just further de-incentivizing people from shooting two-pointers. Lastly is move the three-point line back. Now, this makes probably the most sense out of the three that I've heard, but my problem with this is that I think that you take a shot that should be accessible to everybody in the NBA and you make it inaccessible to almost everybody. Maybe there are 4 or 5 players like Dame, Steph, Clay, Luka, that can still shoot this shot at a high enough percentage to be able to make it worthwhile. But now you have a bunch of players who are being excluded from being able to take that shot, which I don't like either. I like the spacing of the court, and I like the feel of having the ability to make a three-pointer at any time. Furthermore, I think that players are just going to continue to adapt, and in another 5, 6, 7 years, we're going to have to move the three-pointer back even further. We're going to create a wider court, more spacing, more layups, and that's not really what we want. Which brings me to my crazy, weird solution, which in my mind makes sense, and that is to just make the three worth 2.5 points. I know we're throwing a decimal into our beautiful game, but I promise you it'll be worth it. Again, it just breaks down to stats. Instead of 37% of threes being worth 1.11 points, 37% of 2.5 breaks down to 0.925 points. We'll round up to say 0.93 points. This is substantially closer to the 0.96, which is the value of two-pointers shot at 48%. It actually makes it slightly worse, which is good in my opinion, because it values people that shoot the three at a higher rate than league average, and at the same time values players that shoot the two at a higher rate than league average. Again, this just levels the playing field. It makes a shot that was worth inherently more, worth closer to the value of a two-pointer, and it creates a whole new opportunities for these players to score. So Melo can really exploit his mid-range, Kevin Durant can exploit his mid-range, we'll go with a player who's still in the NBA. Dwight Howard could potentially come back and start posting up again, and Steph Curry could still make threes at a ridiculously high rate and have that shot be valuable. Okay, a couple things need to be rectified on this really quick. What happens if you get fouled shooting a three-pointer, or you get an and one down low, or you get an and one shooting a three? Let's start with fouled on a three-pointer. My proposal is that if you make all three of your free throws, it's worth 2.5 points. If you make one, it's worth 1 point. If you make two, it's worth 2. That third free throw that you make is worth 0.5. If we just make every free throw worth 1 point in this case, this would incentivize flopping from three-point shooters to try and get fouled while shooting a three so they can go to the line and make more points for a shot that is more valuable. If you get fouled while shooting a three and you make it, well, I think that should be worth 1 extra point on the free throw. So you can make a total of 3.5 points. I think that this incentivizes really good three-point shooters that actually get fouled and make the shot, and it creates a little bit of an imbalance that I think makes the game interesting. On an and one, I think, again, you make the shot worth 2 points and the free throw worth 1 point for a total of 3 points. Again, it's more valuable than a three-pointer, but if you make a shot and get fouled, I think you deserve more than just making a wide-open three-pointer, and I'm okay with it being worth a little bit more. Again, hey, maybe the simplest and easiest solution is moving the line back. I get that that's probably what's going to happen, but I don't necessarily think it's the best solution. I do genuinely think that if you bring the value of that three-pointer down, that's how you create a long-term balance moving forward. Hey, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm right. Adam Silver, if you're looking to hire somebody, give me a ring. I'm not going to release my phone number because I don't want to be blown up. In conclusion, thank you all for dropping in. I'm Tommy Dubs. Let me know down below what you think of my changes. I definitely think some of them make sense to everybody. I know that the three-point change is going to be a little weird, but let me know what you think down below. Please like, sub, share the video, and we will see you next time in the film studio.